But what I want to do is just sort of start off this panel with just a few slides and some brief remarks to sort of set the stage for why I think this issue is important. And let me start with a hypothesis. Money and people will go where they're treated nicely, and they'll tend to try to escape and move away from where they're treated poorly. That doesn't, to me, sound like some sort of radical notion. It just seems like common sense. If you go to a restaurant that treats you poorly, you won't go there again. Another restaurant that treats you well, you will go there again. When taxes and government policy treat you poorly, you're probably not going to like that jurisdiction. So that's the brain drain hypothesis. Very simple, and I think it shouldn't even be debatable. We can maybe argue about the magnitudes. At what level do taxes or bad policies have to go before people get discouraged and try to move away or try to move their money away? Now let me speak specifically about fiscal policy because I want to get a big caveat out of the way. Lots of things affect the decision of people and or money to cross borders. Fiscal policy is just one decision. I'm going to focus on fiscal policy, but I don't want to pretend that's the only thing that happens. And so whether we're talking about moving from high-tax nations to low-tax nations, or in the U.S., high-tax states to low-tax states, rich people and their money do have this ability to move, and they are sensitive to lots of issues, and taxes are an important part of that decision. And of course, rich people have a lot of control over the timing, level, and composition of their income, and that makes it even easier. See, for most of us, for instance, myself at the Cato Institute, I get a paycheck from the Cato Institute. I don't have a lot of control over that. I can't tell them, okay, hold it off for 3 months or accelerate it by 6 months. But if I'm a rich person, I have a lot of business income or investment income, I do have the ability to alter my affairs. So no matter how you're looking at the successful group of people, the high net worth people, the investors, the entrepreneurs, they do have this ability and control over where their income is recognized, how it's recognized, where it's earned, how it's earned, and so they are very sensitive to changes in government policy. And of course, it's even a bigger issue for transition economies. On this leg of the road show, we're going through Warsaw, Vilnius, and Kiev, and so I put those countries on the list. I think this is IMF data, maybe it's World Bank data, but it's all sort of the same. And so it's very important. One of the arguments I want to make, it's very important for a country like Lithuania to have good policy. Why? Because if you have a highly talented entrepreneur or investor in Lithuania, they have the ability to move to the UK, to Germany, to the United States. They can figure out how to do that. And if it turns out that their talents can be rewarded with higher incomes because of higher living standards in these other countries, maybe they'll move. So it's very important for Lithuania, keep your taxes and other government policies as reasonable as possible because you don't want your best and brightest people, especially your young, talented people, to move away. Because brain drain affects two groups of people. It affects those who already have made money and they're figuring out, how can I protect it? But the brain drain issue also is about your young, talented, ambitious, hungry people who want to become a success. And when they're thinking, where can I be a success, you want to make sure that your policies are attractive to those people. Now, there's lots of anecdotes out there. In Europe, we see the data about, London is now the 6th biggest French city because so many French entrepreneurs, so many successful French people, so many young, ambitious French people will move across to England because the taxes and the regulations and other government policies in France are so punitive. But you also have, when Spain put in that much better tax system for soccer players, all of a sudden they were getting the top soccer talent in the world. And we know, of course, about rich people moving to Monaco and Switzerland. But it's not just a European issue. You go to places like Hong Kong and Singapore, you find expats from all over the world. Again, ones that already are rich and ones who want to become rich. But both of those groups of people are people you should want in your country because they are the job creators, the investors. In other words, rich people are voting with their feet. They want to go where they're going to be treated properly. Again, the brain drain. And I think that for transition economies, tax is a very important tool, again, for the reasons I discussed earlier. I want to show some data from the United States because we don't really have good research from Europe. we have the anecdotes about the soccer players and the rich people and things like that. But in the U.S., because of IRS data, we can do a lot of research on what's happening between U.S. states. And what you see on this map is that the darker red a state is, the more money has moved out of it, and the more green a state is, the more money has moved into it. This is based on data looking at IRS tax returns and the taxable income and how they're shifting across borders. Now, you look at this and, okay, what does it tell you? Well, it doesn't really tell you anything because we have to add some data. So let's think about the hypothesis before we look at two new maps. The hypothesis is that money is going to leave high-tax states and it's going to move to low-tax states. And indeed, some of the high-tax states in America, New York, Illinois, New Jersey, California, and some of the low-tax states where the hypothesis says money will move include zero-income tax states like Florida, Nevada, Washington, and Texas. Now, again, remember the caveat I gave earlier? Taxes aren't the only thing that matter. If everything was exactly the same, would you rather live in New York or Florida? Well, it's a lot warmer in Florida. It's sunny, and you don't have these cold winters where it's minus 20 Celsius. So maybe you would see some movements anyhow between the states. But my hypothesis is that taxes matter. And indeed, California is a place with great climate, but we see here that it's one of the states losing the most money. But take a look at this map, because what I've done is I've shown the states in America with no income tax. These are sort of the Monacos of the United States. Now, of course, we still have the central government income tax, so it's not like we're any place close to Monaco. But nonetheless, it does matter a lot because a significant share of our government policy takes place at the state and local level. And you can see that we have certain states with no income tax. And what do you see? They tend to be states that are green, and many of them are dark green. In other words, they're the biggest beneficiaries of this internal migration in the United States. Now, let's look at another map where we look at the states with the highest state income tax rates. Now, again, it's not a perfect overlap because some dark red states aren't the very highest state taxes. But you can see if you look at the highest state income taxes, you do see a lot of them are these dark red states like California, New York, New Jersey, and others. So when you're looking at a situation where we can get out and tease out the specific data as we can with the United States, we do seem to see very clearly tax migration matters. People and money will go where they are treated well. Well, now let's sort of put this in the context of a country like Lithuania. I think it's very important that Lithuania keep the flat tax. I know that this periodically is an issue, and to me, as a public finance economist, I could make arguments about the importance of low marginal tax rates. I could make arguments about reducing and avoiding double taxation of income that's saved and invested. But I think the most important thing, maybe not the most important, but an important factor in why a flat tax is important is the signaling effect. It's a signal to investors, entrepreneurs, business owners, high net worth people that this is a jurisdiction that is not subject to class warfare. Because class warfare, the idea that you're going to punish people just for being successful with high tax rates, I think that is one of the most poisonous things in terms of an economic climate that's going to reward the people who are successful and can create a lot of jobs. And this is especially important because tax will become an even bigger issue as we have the aging of the population. And a matter of fact, I want to close by showing some data that will underscore how difficult fiscal policy will be in the future. You won't be able to read this chart. It's too far away, maybe the people in the front row. But all you need to know is that the vertical axis shows how much fiscal consolidation is needed between now and 2050, which is what, just 36 years from now? So how much fiscal consolidation is needed as a share of GDP every single year? And it shows countries, of course, on the horizontal axis. So you don't want to be farther out to the right on this chart. You see Japan, the chart goes up to 12% of GDP. Japan, in order to stabilize its finances, would need 12% of GDP fiscal consolidation every single year. That's obviously a disaster waiting to happen. And you do see some countries like Sweden and Switzerland and a few others are in pretty good shape. But most European countries, and the United States, by the way, we're the third worst. Most countries are in deep trouble with a lot of fiscal consolidation needed. Why? Because of aging populations. Why? Well, what do aging populations have to do with it? Well, historically, when you had a population pyramid with like a few old people and then lots of workers and then even more children behind them, you could do an entitlement state. You could do tax and transfer programs for pensions and health care because you had lots and lots of workers to pay the bills. But what's happening over time with fewer and fewer children and more people living longer and longer, that population pyramid is becoming a population cylinder. And even small welfare states become very unstable, which is why you see these numbers. Now, these are from the OECD. Here's some numbers from the IMF. Again, you won't be able to read the chart, but don't worry about this. All you need to understand is that the vertical axis, and this, by the way, is just to 2030, just 16 years from now. The vertical axis shows how much the burden of government spending will increase just for aging-related programs. And then the horizontal axis is the amount of fiscal consolidation needed. It's sort of the same as that OECD chart. So, in other words, you don't want to be in the upper right quadrant. But you don't even want to be in the center of the chart because that still shows that you have big increases in the burden of spending and lots of changes needed to stabilize your finances. The U.S., by the way, is in terrible shape in the upper right quadrant, but you see almost every other country is still in very, very bad shape. In other words, here's my concern. I'm coming here to give a positive message about keeping taxes low, but I also am here with a very pessimistic message about there's such a built-in increase in the burden of government, in all likelihood, politicians will want to make the tax system worse. In other words, we're here talking about what we can do to make the system better. We need to be aware that there are lots of pressures already built into the system to make it worse. And so the brain drain problem from Europe is in all likelihood going to become not just a problem, it's going to become a crisis in the future. In other words, this cartoon, I worry, might be the future of Europe. The taxpayers are the pig that will be just completely drained by all the special interest groups. These, of course, it's an American cartoon, so this lists different American programs, but you could apply this to every country and list their programs for redistribution, welfare, disability, healthcare, pensions, etc., etc. What's happening is that there are too many people riding in the wagon and not enough people pulling the wagon. And what are high taxes? High taxes mean that the people who are pulling the wagon are not just bearing the burden, but there's somebody, a politician, at the driver's spot in the wagon with a whip, treating them poorly. And guess what happens? People who are treated like that eventually decide, I'm going to let go of the ropes, I'm not going to pull the wagon anymore, and I'm going to move someplace else. That, I fear, will be a very, very bad thing, not only for Lithuania, not only for Europe, but also for the United States. Thank you very much.